And would you like to introduce Jean-Michel briefly? I mean, all
Well,
the info is on the website.
well, oh, sure, the fact that I was just saying, he comes highly recommended from Debashish Banerjee, and that's how he ended up in my class, and it's been a delight, and I'm really glad that I put the invitation out to all the students, but he was the one who said, go for it. And so, without any further ado, go for it. Thank you, Michel. Thank you for being here.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity, Professor. I'm honored to be here with all of you. So I'm going, my speech has no images, so I'm just going to read my paper, which is relatively long, so I have to read it at a good pace. It will take like 25 minutes, 20 minutes to complete. Okay. For Jean Gebser, the origin is ever present as a conscious flux. A-dimensional and trans-historical, it unfolds as different and distinct modes in the subject-object relation throughout history, and can be revealed phenomenologically by an intuitive and aesthetic approach using the philosophy of cultures as an instrument. For Sri Aurobindo, matter itself is at the end spectrum of the vibrational densification of a totality of consciousness, and matter itself the matrix for the unfoldment of mental consciousness. And with this rationality, only one mode of expression of the totality of being that seeks complete manifestation in matter, space, and time, thus tending towards the revelation of the unity or integrality between being and becoming, spirit and matter, time and timelessness, which he called Supermind. In Gebser, origin is timeless and is not reached via a synthesizing teleology, but unfolds in history through mutations, grounded in the ever-present simultaneity of past, present, and future that is only grasped as a non-linear apprehension of reality, where time is liberated from the confines of fragmented space, the aperspectival. In Sri Aurobindo as well, there is a leap or the discontinuity between the mental over mental becoming that are bound by the divorce of time, space, and matter, and timelessness of transcendental being. And it is only in the post-human condition of supermind that the drishti, or the conscious self-knowledge of the simultaneity of past, present, and future, that being and becoming, the unity between transcendental selfhood and history or integral consciousness as the total unfoldment of the timeless in time can be realized. The goal of this paper is to explore what kind of modes in the mutation of consciousness was inherent in Gebser's inner realization of what he calls the diaphanous as an opening to origin and how it relates to the psychology of integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Both emphasize the possibility of experiencing the emergence of the future now, and with this, instead of projecting spatially a line towards the future as an exteriorization in time, it can be recoiled as a subjective transpersonal psychological value or tonality that only veils the radically unknown or imageless future, that is a future that one could never imagine through an imaginative capacity bound to the assemblage of images that we receive from the five senses, bound that we are in present time to the visual, living in the era of the word image, as Heidegger would say. As for Aurobindo, the supra-mental entails a vision of the totality of knowledge, and as original idea is imageless in relation to the mind, because it is the simultaneity of all the images as well as their transcendence. All images are fragmentations of reality being sequentially experienced in near time, and imageless points out to a state that is not bound to them anymore. That is when the consciousness of time is liberated from visual perspectival time. What we can is to become permeable to it, that is the itself, the spiritual, that cannot be confined within the limits of rationality, mystic participation, or symbolic archetypal determination. To mutate into this imageless future, beyond our seclusion into the closed mental horizon of the modern civilization paradigm, bound to time that Heidegger speaks about, we have to render present our origin, that is to become aperspectival, or to liberate in our consciousness time from objective and material space. Beyond the limits of a conceptual dialogue between Jean Gebser and Aurobindo, it is possible to apprehend their legacy as complementary, intuitive contemplations, where language enters in resonance with potentialities that are in consciousness ever present. As Gebser himself acknowledges the subliminal influence of Aurobindo as a being throughout his work, even before he took formal knowledge of integral yoga. When he wrote The Ever-Present Origin, in fact, Jean Gebser did not know Sri Aurobindo. But in the second edition of the book, he suggests that what he wrote was preeminent in the works of Sri Aurobindo, from which he visited the ashram much later. What Sri Aurobindo had called the supra-mental, he called the aperspectival integral. This new consciousness he sees as a result from an altered relation to time, as diasporically emerging now in the present postmodern world crisis. As he writes, anyone today who considers the emergence of a new era of mankind as a certainty and expresses the convictions that our rescue from collapse and chaos could come only by virtue of a new attitude and a new formation of man's consciousness. And the present book is in fact the account of the nascence of a new world and a new consciousness. It is based not on ideas and speculations, but on insights into mankind's mutation from its primordial beginnings up to the present. Now, instead of conceptually comparing juxtapose the idea presented in the works of both Aurobindo and Gebser, we want to try an approach into the quality of insight as experienced and related by Gebser, which culminated in Sarnath as his own realization of the aperspectival, from which mutations in consciousness are not only perceived, but arise. Realization that in the likeness of Sri Aurobindo's yogic experience of mental silence arises as a precursor towards the emergence of superior stages in consciousness, culminating as supermind, that are all, as intuited by Gebser, enfoldments of altered relations from the subject in relation to time, from physical time to psychological time, cosmic time, and finally the union of time and timelessness into the supracosmic that manifests a new supramental reality on Earth. First of all, one could easily argue that Aurobindo envisions what he calls supramental and Gebser the integral aperspectival as a culminating point of evolution in time, therefore experientially contradicting Gebser's ontological standpoint of an ever-present origin that precedes time, but manifests most of itself in unfolding mutations throughout time in different tonalities, without the totality of its being as ever-present primordial vibration ceasing to resonate. In our understanding, what Gebser poetically refers as the origin, Aurobindo has called the supra-mental jivatman, and its immanent presence in man's consciousness through time and history, he has called the psychic being. In integral yoga, both from a metaphysical and yogic practical viewpoint, this distinction appears to be fundamental. To understand this intermingling Aurobindo's and Gebser's terminology, we could comprehend the psychic being as projected presences in time of individualized transcendental aspects of origin as a multiplicity of divine beings or jivas, the divine beings or jivatmans projecting rays of the total consciousness in time, forming psychic beings, playing in the different modes of consciousness displayed throughout history. Man's origin or jivatman is transcendental to time as it encompasses both the timeless and the simultaneous knowledge of the three times as supermind drishti, but unfolds itself in time as it projects the psychic being or man's reincarnating soul, gradually unfolding or revealing potentialities of jivatman's total beingness in time, matter, and space. That is to say that man's soul or its origin in the timeless or jivatman is already integral in his consciousness, but chooses to fragment its totality as an immanence, as an in time and matter, that is the psychic being, in order to manifest the integral inside the limitations of the temporal. With this, the different modes of consciousness and their mutations, from which subconsciousness and unconsciousness, or the archaic and the magical, are now latent inner manifestations once externalized as primary relational modes between subject and object, are now superseded by the mental, are nothing but unfolding instrumental vehicles for the projections of the psychic or soul that has ever-present origin presses towards its integral fulfillment. Now, if the psychic being or the origin is ever present in us, what could this sacred presence unveil to our very consciousness in the now, as a reality that could manifest as the true future, that is the emergence of the radical new or the faceless unknown, beyond the confines of our mind and as the only possible issue to the entrapment into the outer and inner fragmentation of postmodernity? According to Sri Aurobindo and Gebser, it lies in our consciousness presence to time as a presentification of its origin inside of ourselves. That is, for our consciousness to become present now to the presence of origin. And how does this practically occur? According to Gebser, it is by the liberation in consciousness of time from space. In relation to space, our present mode of consciousness is unidirectional. That is, that both the eyes and the mental consciousness working through them are incapable of directly experiencing a totality of space, not even of the individual's body totality of surrounding space. Therefore, we attribute to everything we can see sequentially a sense of trust into this direct objectivity, valued as the only exclusive truth. As we cannot see all space simultaneously or from different perspectives or points in space. Similarly, our thought process, from which most humans' consciousness is confined, can only think of one thing or have one thought consciously at the same time, mirroring with this the limitation of our common visual sensory experience. Therefore, the sequential fragmentation of vision that divides time rationally and mathematically is internalized by the consciousness as the validation of the linear movements of sequential thoughts as the only reality, that is, psychological time, while the other latent modes of perception and consciousness are suppressed. Now, this is the very simple reason why in most traditions of yoga, meditation is practiced wakefully erected, but with closed eyes as the first simple and most pragmatic step that nevertheless has profound subjacent magical and archetypal implications towards the integration of the consciousness away from its identification with the visually fragmented perspectival perception, and as a first step to the apprehension of time as a purely psychological value created by the sequence of mental images. Now, what becomes our experience, if detached from visual time, our internal experience of the time between two thoughts is eliminated. Eventually, thoughts disappear from consciousness without loss of the sense of self, like in the experience of deep sleep. And what would happen to our perception of space through vision if the movement of thought is not used by our consciousness to interpret both outer and inner realities? Is not the very perception of our own physical embodiment not profoundly changed if the consciousness becomes truly aperspectival? And what is there then to distinguish the inside from the outside, while the mind or the thoughts are still there as one among other instruments available to consciousness that stands ever beyond them into a permanent and stable state of being, culminating in perfect equanimity? In our understanding, it is the fundamental intuition of this mode of consciousness as a gateway towards the integral that grounds the literary masterpiece of the ever-present origin and the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, as evocations of intuition or insight from which the experience of the diaphanous in Gebser and the mental science of Sri Aurobindo are principal entries. The diaphanous or transparency of self can be recognized as a translucent immanence of being in the world and things. It is the very quality that in integral yoga must be established in all the levels of the being, from the mental to the physical, in order for the psychic being or the presence of origin to shine with a sudden solar immanence within the consciousness as a precipitation of the future being into the present, for the integration of the totality of the past, including the physical and its absolute fulfillment. The very definition of transparency is what lets the light pass through. If the light or knowledge consciousness, the gnosis or vijnana of Sri Aurobindo, is the origin or ultimate reality, transparency is the mode of consciousness that can become the instrument, the vehicle of his presence, like the flute of Krishna that resonates through the divine breath or the original logos, the vibrational radiance of the psychic being. The fact that it was in Sarnath, where the Buddha preached his first sermon, that Gebser experienced the diaphanous is most relevant here for obvious reason. Shakyamuni's first sermon inaugurates what he calls Dharma Chakra Pravatana, that is the turning of the wheel of time, thus inaugurating a new path of relationality to time, marked in Buddha's teaching by the liberation from it and its dissolution to nirvana. Now the marriage between nirvana and samsara, or between time and timelessness, or the integral consciousness or the ever-present origin, manifested in time, is Sri Aurobindo's Supermind and Gebser's aperspectival integral. This is how Gebser describes his emergence to transparency of the diaphanous. There had been no rapture to observe. I was not swept away into the irrational. There was no loss of consciousness of the world. Instead, there was the overcoming of the mental rational. There was a rational transparency, and with it that intensity of consciousness that had integrated both the irrational and the rational in such a manner that both were respectively available, without the possibility of being overwhelmed by them. For their bearers, the vital and the psychic submit to the spiritual. One cannot make this transparency visible. One cannot see it. Indeed, one is incapable of becoming perceptibly aware of it, in the precise sense of the word aware, through effortless intensification of wakefulness. It is more than clarity or illumination, more than transfiguration or glorification, more than radiance. One possibly could speak of it as the flashing force or sudden shining through of the whole. Who participates in this is more or less purified, as it is melted and remolded, liberated from the scoria of the soul, from the narrow limitations of meditations, without in the slightest manner being lost to the world through intoxication or ecstatic rapture. Rather, who participates in this find themselves perfectly in order, with a deeper sense of trust and with the sacred lucidity of origin's ever-presence pulsating through them. Now, the starting point of Sri Aurobindo's yogic journey was his rapid attainment of a state of total silence, where under the guidance of a yogi called Lele, he could attain to a state of total mental silence using a radical method of Raja Yoga, consisting in pushing the thoughts perceived by vibrations coming from the outside or the cosmos, pushing them out before they enter the consciousness field of the mind. After this, Aurobindo found himself capable of delivering an entire political speech effortlessly, without the intervention of his mental consciousness and directed by a force coming from above. This culminated soon after as his consciousness awareness of the immanence of the one into the whole, or the divine presence of Shri Krishna. The confluence in the structure of experience of the two modes of awakening of Gebser and Sri Aurobindo is evident. The overcoming of the mental rational expressed by Gebser is the overcoming of the noise of thoughts or linear thinking into silence expressed by Sri Aurobindo. But as pointed out by Gebser, this is achieved in an intensification of wakefulness that does not entail the soul rapture into a trance-like state, which corresponds to Sri Aurobindo's experience as well. For him, all life, including wakeful action in the world, is yoga, that is union. The diaphanous or transparency of self can be recognized as a translucent immanence of being at the heart of the world, men and things. Therefore, for Gebser, the sudden shining force of the whole is nothing but the radiance in the transparent sky of consciousness of the brightless light of origin's solar presence, that is the immanence of the jivatman as psychic being in the purified state of transparency, of wholeness in overmind's cosmic order, multi-temporary consciousness, or the anachron, opening to the marriage of the irrational with the rational, of the instrument of a translucent illuminated mind to the totality of transcendental being in supermind that is instantly aware of itself as the whole, or the integral manifested and unmanifested as the original ever-presence. This is not a shining force of the brightness of the mind, nor a retrocession into the darkness of archaic fusion, but to become transparent to the totality of the eternal now in the world. It is neither an escape from the world or from time, or a merging in time, but its fulfillment as integral unity in ultimate being. This rushing of the future into the present is the recognition of the perfect unity between subject and object, as well as the validation of their internal joyous interplay of mutations throughout creation in time that unveil itself through non-linear eternal cycles, or yugas in yoga, or systasis in Gebser's Unitarian language. The perspectival was the separation of the self from the world and its disenchantment that now culminates in our collective imprisonment in technological time. But the solution does not lie in the extension of the virtual, robotic, and mentally quasi-omniscient super-rationality, nor in symbolic affirmation of the archetypal meaning of the word, or in magical, mystical participation into the whole alone, but rather in the resonance of the totality of our being in its mental and over-mental dimensions with the vibrational and perpetual transparency, or the musical flow of silence mystery. To become silent in yoga is therefore the same thing as to be diaphanous in embodied consciousness, and therefore permeable to the brightest light of the transparency of self in all beings and things, or the recognition of origins ever present in time as a creative principle. For Sri Aurobindo, the ultimate fulfillment of the ever-presence of origin in time is physical immortality, that is, in his own words, to be perpetually reborn in time through an eternal and never newly blissful process of cellular conscious mutation. That's it. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at reading in English.
Oh, it's awesome. Thank you. Wow. How long is that paper, Michel?
It was too long, I know.
No.
I'm not sure. A few pages. It's yeah, 6 pages.
Wow.
I tried my best. It's not easy to talk about those two authors because they are both complex, even if the mystical application or the spiritual application of their message is not complex, but they themselves, I find they are very complex.
Thank you very much for the background. I'm new to this organization and Gebser's thought, and getting the background and his relationship to Sri Aurobindo. That was very good education. Thank you. Where it all comes from, where it started. Thank you very much.
But when I read, as you, I know that for all of you, it's not those things are not new. But when I read the way Gebser described his own enlightenment, and the fact that later on he related so much to Aurobindo, the starting point of his of Aurobindo's journey is really very similar to Gebser's way he describes enlightenment. Both speak of transparency, of silence, and as a point in self where everything emerges. And this I found very beautiful to recognize.
The only thing I didn't understand was you were saying the jivatmans is the psychic being is comparable to the origin. Okay, Okay, please explain that more.
Yeah, there is in Aurobindo there's a very important distinction between the jivatman and the psychic being. That is, as an original idea. I mean, as per the Vedanta, the souls have never been created. So when they are still individual, like in their supracosmic state beyond time, but they haven't descended into time. Of course, those are just images, but those divine individualities are the jivatmans. And what Aurobindo and the mothers say is that each one of these jivatmans is going to project one part of itself that is going to do an experience through time as a reincarnating soul. And this they call the psychic being. So that means that this psychic being is suffering a process of evolution through time, while its origin, its divine individuality, or the jivatman is not, is already perfect, is already realized.
Oh, that's great. That's the same thing Native Americans refer to as the holy ones. So the spirit beings before they come into form.
Yes.
So it's
that will mean that us as soul, you as soul, me as soul, we all as souls, we are projections. As souls, we are projections of individualized divine consciousness that are out of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I really appreciated the the comparison of terms and ways of being or consciousness states or whatever that you discussed, because it felt to me like, I mean, I would love to read your paper. It was like a lot all at once. And so I'd love to have the luxury of getting to sit and read it and kind of, I don't know, live into it a little bit more. But what I was able to take in and hear was this, I mean, it felt to me like it was illuminating by bringing in Sri Aurobindo's process and his way and the comparison between the terms. It felt like it was illuminating of Gebser and of the states, so I really it brought more I don't know, kind of essence to the aperspectival for me through that lens of Sri Aurobindo. So I don't know if you would be at all willing to share. I would love to get a copy of your article so that I could breathe it in a little bit more. And I'm so appreciative that you brought it to this forum. It was really quite wonderful.
Okay, I'll share with pleasure. I'm still in the process of finishing it, because I intended for it to be to submit it to CIS also from one of my classes. So it just needs to a bit more polishment. And then with great pleasure, I share it with all of you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But I share your feelings. I feel that Aurobindo and Gebser illuminate each other. And that both are important because it was also Aurobindo's and the mother's project to synthesize the spirit of East and West. And of course, Gebser did the work about Western history that Aurobindo didn't, because he was really concentrated on the Vedas, and what he says is in the logic of this. But then when Gebser is making the integral emerge, but understanding it through our history as Westerners, I think this is a very important piece of the whole project of Aurobindo and the Mother.
Yeah, it's great. And I had the great opportunity of speaking. I forgot. I'm like totally spacing on his name, but the man in Switzerland in Bohm who's published all of Gebser's works and is republishing them. And and he and his wife at the time were sort of young people that attended Gebser's salons on Sunday afternoons, where they would sit around and and he said that Gebser was very much a mystic kind of person, and that he would ask a question and Gebser would look at him and Gebser would respond to something completely different, but which was really that which the man was asking but didn't even know that he was asking. But that was really the question that he was holding. And the other thing too, that he's in his view, it was like Gebser had gotten a download really early on. He'd just sort of gotten the whole thing downloaded, and then slowly and wrote about it and unpacked it. But that it was almost like kind of sounded like a divine inspiration, if you will, that just sort of came into him, and then he wrote. So.
Yeah, this is incredible, and this is the same thing that happened to Aurobindo when he first started to write. He entered into this state of mental silence, and then he he started to write now what we have as the content of the divine life, but he wrote it extremely quickly. Like it's almost impossible for a human being to do that with that quality. But he was just like what people call nowadays channeling.
Yeah. Awesome.
What people call nowadays, what did you say?
Channeling. I mean, the new age people say it's a channeled information.
Channeling, automatic writing. He means.
I got it. There are so many points of departure in your paper that I was moving through them all. In the midst of it, in my an image did form for me, but may I say an imageless image, but a mandala in the work. One aside comment is in the introduction to EPO, Gebser does speak of Aurobindo, and Gebser also speaks of Teilhard de Chardin, and that's worth noting. In my own spiritual path, embracing Aurobindo is opening to what has been referred to as the East, in contrast to the West. Those terms seem increasingly fluid, shall we say. I was very privileged to travel to Bangalore and to travel to one of the homes of Aurobindo and the mother, which is now available as a meditation center in downtown Bangalore. But and then, of course, with all the paradox being Bangalore as the center of Indian technological high-tech development, at least it was, and maybe it's, I don't know. Again, there's so much in what you say. They're all profoundly valuable syneresis. And for me, of course, I'm very grateful to have traveled to India. And it's so important to move through Gebser with transparency into the wholeness of the whole, so that it's possible to lose mindfulness of the Indian people, the story of India, the Chinese people, the story of China, and then you cited more than once Gebser's cultural history, as it were, of Western civilization. Indeed so. At one time we used the term Western consciousness, or somebody did. I know I've heard
Jung, I think.
I've heard that.
I think that's Jung. Yeah, that's Jung, I think.
Jung definitely, and we haven't brought in Jung for this entire conference, but we could have. I think in there, one of your expressions was nirvana is samsara.
Yeah,
you said something
I think it was not exactly this, but the idea, I mean, at least from what I understand it, is that because Aurobindo wants to reconcile the experience of the timeless with the experience of time, and time is the samsara, and of course the timelessness is the nirvana, but for him the ultimate experience, which he calls Supermind, is the capacity of seeing that the timeless and time, the samsara and the nirvana are the same thing. Like yeah.
Gebser says, and I couldn't emphasize it too much. If one is new to Gebser, and there are lots of resources available, Doug, to move into this zone as much as you are led to. But in EPO, Gebser says in a section of a relatively few number of pages, it's about page 564 or something like that, temporics. And he said, in one way, everything I'm talking about can be expressed in terms of temporics. And he has a very concise section of it, and it's just what you just said, and that is experiencing multiple modalities of time, as well as timelessness. And then Gebser uses the term time freedom. And all of this is very harmonizable with Aurobindo. And then when one turns to Aurobindo and his place in India, and we can bring in Vivekananda, we can bring in Ramakrishna, these lineages in India. We can even bring in Gandhi in terms of Aurobindo. But it's important work. In the work, you also brought in spatialization. Gebser was very clear about how the mental rational tends to be a spatializing, visualizing mode. And if we become attentive to how often we use spatial terms to express awareness, and then think, well, what is it if I move through that, if in transparency through the spatialization into, I mean, you said closing one's eyes in the integral yoga. And you also mentioned the achronon. I'll put that in chat just in case anybody's not familiar with, which is really the central feature in Gebser's paper, The Invisible Origin. And that's achronon with a capital A. And it is a mystic notion if we're going to struggle with terms like that. But to see the divine in all in all. Aurobindo is leading us to that, and Gebser is as well as Teilhard de Chardin, as well as Carl Jung, and then we can, as well as everybody.
Yeah.
If held in transparency, if beheld in transparency. Well, anyway, those are just some resonances. Thank you very much. I appreciate the mandala you've got on the wall there behind you.
Yeah, well, I happened to have it before. I was in my university with this is also the symbol of CIIS. I appear to have it at home.
The Sri Yantra, yeah.
Yeah, the Sri Yantra.
Yeah. I have very deep Hindu, to use that term, resonances in the marrow of my being, as well as Egyptian resonances. And if we all open up to all the varying resonances that flow through us, again, we will somehow experience totality, as Aurobindo is saying, the aperspectival. And there's some very profound work on perspective and topology, and the Kleinian dimension, which again was on the front page of the New York Times this week, coming at us from quantum physics, indeed. Black holes as being Kleinian, where inside and outside are no longer meaningful expressions.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Yeah, I think this is the most important thing in yoga, is that this realization that everything that we thought that was inside actually is outside, which is to realize the nature of conditioning. So the mind is not inside. When we close our eyes, but I am with myself, but what I consider myself is everything I gather. And so the self, the inside is much deeper, maybe higher. Or
well, there you're spatializing.
That's it's true. It's not. I think they say higher because here, because it's outside of the body, then it becomes everywhere. Yeah? Like that's how I view it.
So I have just a short question. The ease with which you discussed these very complex topics led me to wonder whether you've had an experience of of which you spoke?
If I had an experience. But you see, the thing with experience is that if you experience something, it's only like an experience is something very bound, right? You know
Very
what I mean?
bound, did you say?
Yes, because if I say, okay, I experience something like enlightenment, if I say I experience.
Right.
But the problem is the I.
Uh-huh.
I think this is what I can say. But the beauty of those teaching is that I strongly believe that we already know all this. That is what Gebser and Aurobindo are pointing out. That it's already there. We already know it. We just have to, and we go through flux. Sometimes we are more open to this knowledge that we already know. Sometimes we close back, and sometimes we open more. And definitely, and there's a moment we just open.
Yeah, even Socrates would say that. Socrates, said that it's all remembering.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was very, Jean-Michel, I was very interested in this relationship between Sri Aurobindo and Gebser, which I have followed in the past. I'm a little bit rusty on it now because I've been too involved with other things, but this connection between East and West reminded me of a book that was when we had, and I think you were there, John, when we did our JSSS conference in Portland. You went to that one. There was a young lady there who had just finished her dissertation at Pacific Graduate Institute, and she wrote about Patanjali and Jung. She wrote a book called Consciousness in Patanjali and Jung. And that's also this connection between East and West. And what was interesting from my point of view was that she came up to me and asked me to do a review of that book, which I did. It was published in one of the Jungian journals. I've forgotten which one. But there's that very interesting connection. And that's it. Her name is Leanne Whitney, if anybody wants to note that down. It's a book called Consciousness in Patanjali and Jung. And it talks about the same kinds of things that you're discussing there with this relationship between Gebser and Sri Aurobindo. So it's interesting to make this connection between East and West and to bring it as much to light as possible. So that's all I wanted to say about that. But it's an interesting connection.
It's true.
The two, Gebser, Aurobindo, and Patanjali, yeah.
Well, we also have East-West, but we have the middle. We have the thirds, the indigenous that don't really fit into either East or West in the framing that we're using. What could be more spatializing than to speak of East-West? But we can work with it, and this is what we have to work with. In our work, and the reason for our convening is because we are engaged with this. This is why we want to talk together. This is why we want to be together. But then, as again, Jesse brought in Levinas, and Levinas is always with us. And Levinas is saying the very first priority is how are we relating to the others, as his book Otherwise Than Being, which would take us back to love, Glenn, I think, or how are we loving each other? And some of us need to love each other, speaking for myself, this way. This is a way of loving. The questions, the music, and here where I'm into the dance of images, but my sculpture is really, I think, sort of Hindu in its flavor. Anyway, which is
I just want to say, share a thought bubble about Levinas, which, with this whole thing where he's focused on the other. And it even says that Martin Buber, who with I and thou, that even that was wrong because it was a bidirectional. And he's like, no, it's asymmetrical. The other takes way precedence over me. It's not like a back and forth necessarily. And I was thinking that, kind of reading between the lines on that, if that wasn't a way to step outside of the I ego-ness completely, it's sort of like losing self completely, getting out of the I subject space completely by having it all be about other. Anyway, just a thought there.
On the other hand,
and
it's interesting you use the word I space. Other brain, other hand.
Yeah, on the other hand.
From the Jung side, this term ego gets to be really problematic because in development, and I think Aurobindo would certainly be on board with this. So, the development of a functional ego is a matter of basic health. So we have to be, in my opinion, we have to be careful in attacking the ego as if it is the monster. I guess it can be, but none of us could be here right now without a functional ego.
I think
go up.
That's somewhat cultural, John. So there are cultures that function better without ego and some it's considered a necessity then to go beyond. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm always fascinated by the word enlightenment. Because as Jean Michel's talking about, who is the I who's enlightened, because it's the Eastern definition of enlightenment is the complete opposite from the Western period known as the Enlightenment, where it's the ego that's shedding light on, it's, but somehow we need both of those somehow. I mean, we have to include it all. And we seem to be doing it here. So it's good.
Heaven help us with Robert's concern, which he brings in for education. Because everything we're talking about here, whatever our capabilities might be and whatever our limitations are, there are young people in the world. And there are young people who are going through development. There are quite a number of young people. And it raises the issue of education, the phenomenology of education, if you will. And that's with us as well. How does a newborn babe, and we brought that up here today, you said a child is not born a blank slate. I couldn't agree more. And yet anyone here who's raised children or been around children, children are demanding. They are others as well as the others. And how do we accept the responsibility of education? That's Robert's prime.
You're leaving that question open. Well, I think of it more in the sense of not obliterating the ego, which a lot of people talk about in Eastern philosophy, which I think is wrong anyway. What we're facing in the West, to say yesterday, is that this both the Jungian and the Freudian perspective on development is a race toward becoming centered in the ego. And when you do that, what Neumann says is that the cultural superego then becomes the court of consciousness. And I see a lot of what we do in education as pushing children so hard toward developing that ego and becoming part of that that collective consciousness where the cultural superego is the court of consciousness, that they are not respecting the earlier modes of consciousness that the child goes through. simply by respecting those, you equal the ego. What I think is the most important at this point. I hope I didn't blank out there. I don't know.
It faded in and out, but we could understand
you got it.
Got the gist.
Now,
Yeah.
my internet has been really, really crazy during this whole conference. I'm sorry, but yeah. So I mean, that's my take on it, and that's part of the Western, the Eastern philosophy too, is to de-emphasize the ego. I think the ego is always there, but it's just not the center of consciousness that Jung and Freud thought it was.
Oh, but wait. That would not be an accurate statement for Jung. Ego is a complex. Jung is going to emphasize the notion of self, not just ego. But as we near the end of our Gebser 2022 conference, again, it's wonderful to be together. It's wonderful that for each of us to bring our raison d'etre for being here, and otherwise than being. The conversations are important to me. The Gebser Society is important to me. It's the only place to have this conversation quite this way.
Yeah.
And so all the contributions and participations and presencing, presentiation, and somehow our theme, the presence of the future within us. I mean, that's really an awesome invitation to transparency. How can we actually embrace the presencing of the future within us as we adjourn our conference and return to whatever it is we're returning to?
John, I really want to thank you for that incredibly beautiful theme that came through you. Mm-hmm. It was really very beautiful. And next year when we meet in person, we'll have to take a trip to do that, or almost all of us. Hopefully not an ego trip, but we'll take a trip. And we'll all be together in New Mexico.
I think there are a number of people who would be quite ready to join us in person and who are simply zoomed out and simply are not drawn to spending extended time in Zoom sessions. So as you say, we'll actually be together. We will be eating food. We will be sweating. We will be